Fans were shocked by Molly Qerim's abrupt departure, which led to a lot of conjecture. Now, shocking new video of her and Stephen A. Smith together has come to light, showing angry conversations that completely alter the situation.
Molly is a friend. Molly is a co-worker. Molly is somebody that I have leaned on many occasions in the past, as she has done when it comes to me. We've been partners on the show for the last 10 years. And a lot of times some of these things happen and it's just uncomfortable to see.
Viewers are desperate for the whole truth, even though Stephen seems to be attempting to resolve the conflict. The actual events that took place behind the cameras. This video may provide the answer. The unexpected exit and the actual behind-the-scenes events. On September 15, 2025, Molly Qerim, the long-standing host of ESPN's flagship debate show, First Take, abruptly left the network, sending the sports media industry into complete turmoil. This wasn't your typical break from a show on television. Fans, co-workers, and industry insiders were left reeling from this abrupt and unexpected departure from one of the most prominent positions in sports media, as it was a seismic shift that sent shockwaves through the entire sports broadcasting landscape. Qerim made the unexpected choice to leave everything with immediate effect after hosting First Take for almost 10 years and working for ESPN for nearly 20 years in total. There was nothing more startling, surprising, or enigmatic about the timing. The customary goodbye tours, slow transition periods, and well-planned send-offs that usually accompany such high-profile exits from major television networks were absent. Rather, the public saw a quick and clean break that left everyone wondering what might have transpired at ESPN headquarters behind closed doors. Stephen A. Smith, Qerim's co-host and perhaps the most well-known voice in sports media today, addressed the topic of discussion on his SiriusXM radio show the morning after Qerim's resignation was announced. Everyone was thinking about it, but few had hard data on it. For weeks and months to follow, his remarks that day would be the focus of intensive examination, discussion, and analysis. When Smith talked about his now former co-host, there was a noticeable, indisputable, and apparently sincere emotion in his voice. This was not the flamboyant, exaggerated Stephen A. Smith that sports fans have become accustomed to and occasionally despise. This was a different side of the divisive commentator, one that was open, thoughtful, and obviously shocked by the abrupt change of events that had just occurred at work. However, as Smith went on, his remarks became increasingly enigmatic and obscure, which would feed conjecture and conspiracy theories for months to come.
A lot of times some of these things happen and it's just uncomfortable to see. The details, quite frankly, are none of y'all business, but it's not as if I know all the details.
This comment alone created a void of information that would soon be filled with rumors, conjecture, and innuendo from all across the sports media and social media realms, since it asked more questions than it did answers. When Stephen A. Smith stated that it was difficult to examine the specifics, what did he mean exactly? What was he concealing? What did he know that the general public wasn't aware of? Perhaps most intriguingly, why was he protecting material that could have explained one of the most significant stories in sports media? Smith did provide some specific information regarding the circumstances surrounding Qerim's departure. Even so, it seems like there are more questions than answers raised by these discoveries.
It was a contract negotiation that was going on. ESPN certainly did not want to lose her, but in the end, she made a decision to walk away from the show effective immediately, as you see from her Instagram post, her Instagram story.
In television broadcasting, contract talks are infamously difficult and frequently contentious affairs that involve not just money amounts, but also issues of creative autonomy, schedule flexibility, extra responsibilities, and long-term career trajectory. It was implied that something fundamental had broken down in those negotiations, something substantial enough to make her willing to leave behind a prestigious position that many in the industry would consider the pinnacle of sports broadcasting achievement. Given that ESPN apparently wanted to keep Qerim, but she decided to walk away. In an Instagram post, Qerim acknowledged her leave and thanked the network, supporters, and co-workers for her time at ESPN. However, she notably provided no explanation for her leaving. She thanked her for her services to sports media and said the choice was tough but essential, obliquely mentioning potential future opportunities. The statement was purposefully ambiguous, polite, and professional. The sort of thoughtfully constructed message that seems to say something significant, but actually says very little. In the days and weeks after Kim's resignation was announced, the behind-the-scenes narrative of what caused her to leave started to surface through a variety of media publications and insider perspectives. Burke Magnus, the president of content at ESPN, stated that the resignation was a mutual choice resulting from a misalignment in contract negotiations, giving her what he referred to as a clean break to look into options outside the network. Although neat and professional, this official explanation didn't appease some who felt there was a lot more to the story than what was being acknowledged in the public eye. Marcellus Way, a former ESPN analyst, offered some of the most extensive and incendiary conjectures regarding the actual events of the unsuccessful contract talks. WI described organizational dynamics, power battles, and purported behind-the-scenes tensions in his Hydration Crisis podcast. These issues went far beyond straightforward disagreements over pay scales or contract stipulations. Qerim had been requesting a significant pay increase from her claimed salary range of $500,000 to $800,000, possibly hoping to match or even surpass her pay to reflect her value as the host of one of ESPN's flagship programs, according to Wyatt's statement. Beyond her position as moderator on First Take, she might have been looking for further chances inside the network, including her own show or other high-profile hosting roles that would highlight her abilities. However, this is where Wyatt's story becomes especially fascinating and potentially explosive. He claimed that Stephen A. Smith has such enormous power at ESPN that you get what you want when he gives his approval, implying that Smith is extremely powerful when it comes to the network's contract discussions and hiring decisions. It was an obvious and devastating implication. With his approval and assistance, Smith could have ensured that Qerim received what she was requesting. However, WI claims that Smith failed to support his 10-year co-host during these important discussions, which fueled her escalating annoyance and ultimately led her to decide to leave ESPN completely. WI cited Qerim's utter absence of Smith from her parting remarks as compelling proof of what he saw as shady behind-the-scenes business practices. As he so beautifully stated, they weren't cool with each other to the point someone you've worked with for 10 years, you don't even mention them when you're gone. Many people who had followed the story closely found resonance in this observation because it seemed nearly unthinkable that someone would work so closely with a co-worker for 10 years and then completely remove them from their farewell message without there being some sort of serious underlying tension or resentment. WI also drew attention to what he perceived as unfair pay practices at ESPN, pointing out that other ESPN stars, such as Mina Kimes, allegedly made more money than come in spite of playing less important or noticeable parts in the network schedule. This contrast brought up awkward concerns about how ESPN evaluates various talent types, and whether or not these compensation decisions are influenced by reasons other than just revenue generating and ratings. When other stories emerged indicating that Qerim and Smith's working relationship had seriously soured in the months preceding her departure, the plot thickened even more. According to one particularly damaging rumor, Smith's ESPN boss never thought well of her as a talent. If accurate, the accusation would imply that Qerim encountered resistance from several network power centers, rendering her position more and more precarious irrespective of the caliber of her work or her contributions to the show's success. Speaking on the Speak Easy podcast with hosts Kieran Hickey-Simple and Leon McCoy, former ESPN host and pundit Emmanuel Aiko shared his own critical viewpoint on Stephen A. Smith's handling of Qerim's leaving announcement. Smith is accused of making matters worse by disclosing only a portion of the information regarding the abruptness of her departure and the contract disagreement, while also denying knowledge of other elements and demanding privacy. They saw his remarks as conflicting, too dramatic, and ultimately aimed at generating public curiosity and conjecture rather than offering clarification or giving Qerim more control over her own story as she advanced in her career. However, Stephen A. Smith continued to offer commentary on the matter. Smith gave a lengthy monologue about leverage, value, and understanding one's place in the media ecosystem that would become one of the most examined and contested parts of his career. Many people took this as a more general philosophical discussion about the sports media industry, but it seemed clearly aimed, at least in part, at his former co-host situation. It appeared to be a clear message. In addition to skill, hard effort, perseverance, and, possibly most importantly, a precise grasp of one's market value and negotiation position are necessary for success in sports journalism. However, Smith was only beginning to offer what would turn out to be a sharply critical commentary on leverage, contract negotiations, and the realities of working in the television business. Throughout this lengthy commentary, Smith made it very evident to everyone listening that he was, in fact, discussing Molly and the events surrounding her departure from First Take and ESPN, despite his repeated insistence that he was not discussing Molly with these remarks, a rhetorical device that completely failed to fool anyone. Many observers saw this specific statement to be particularly incisive and possibly illuminating of Smith's perspective on Cum's negotiation stance and her choice to leave ESPN. Qerim may have felt she was entitled to a specific amount of pay or opportunities within the network, but it appeared that she lacked the power to effectively demand those things from ESPN management in terms of ratings draw, revenue generation, or other employment options. The incredible on-air relationship and professional dynamic that Molly Qerim had developed with Stephen A. Smith over the course of their 10-year partnership must be understood before one can fully appreciate the significance and shock value of her leaving First Take. The nuanced backstory and on-air rapport that made First Take an essential television program. Qerim became the permanent host of First Take. She took on a position in September 2015 that required her to mediate contentious arguments between strong personalities while also offering her own opinions, thoughts, and analysis on the sports-related subjects under discussion. By the time Qerim took up hosting responsibilities, Smith, who had been the show's main character since 2012, was already widely recognized as one of the most well-known and contentious voices in sports media. Their on-air dynamic was marked from the start by what seemed to be genuine chemistry, a natural relationship, and a light-hearted banter that made their exchanges feel more natural and spontaneous than forced and unnecessarily staged. Throughout their time together, Smith has frequently lauded Qerim in public, referring to her as a buddy and coworker. He depended on her and gave her credit for being instrumental in bringing the program to new levels of cultural significance and appeal. Anyone who routinely watched First Take could not deny the chemistry between Smith and Qerim. Their conversations frequently brimmed with humor, vigor, and a spirit of rivalry that kept viewers interested and entertained. One particularly noteworthy instance that perfectly captured their on-air relationship was when Qerim questioned Smith's assessment of her physical prowess, a move that quickly went viral on social media. As Qerim, obviously insulted by Smith's apparent misunderstanding of her athletic skill and competitive spirit, issued what can only be described as a direct challenge to her co-host's physical strength and toughness. The exchange continued to intensify in both comedy and severity. This particular moment was television gold. Impromptu, enjoyable, and illuminating of the true degree of ease and familiarity that Qerim and Smith had established after years of close collaboration. Another memorable instance in their collaboration occurred when the two got into heated arguments about basketball, with Qerim proving she could easily compete with one of the sport's most informed and frank analysts. In a conversation concerning the Boston Celtics and their chances of winning a championship, Qerim disclosed that she had been texting Smith during games, making bold predictions and jokingly making fun of his analysis, when she was right between 0.9 and 0.32. "I'm just looking at this because Jay Williams and Kendrick Perkins, all I'm looking at is this. I'm looking for this text message for Molly. Okay, it went off on me a few days ago. She was sending things during the game. You know the celebration is finished because the Celtics are winning this. This is her statement. She said this. June 8th evening." Smith then went on to read aloud from Qerim's text conversations, demonstrating how self-assured and even arrogant she had grown in her ability to forecast basketball games and her readiness to correct her well-known co-host when she thought he was mistaken. Qerim responded with her usual wit and self-deprecation when her private texts were made public on national television. These instances of lighthearted tension and competitive banter were not isolated occurrences, but rather reflected the larger dynamic that made First Take such captivating television, even though she was obviously correct in her evaluation of Smith's basketball analysis. Smith frequently referred to their relationship as familial, comparing it to a brother-sister dynamic in which they could push, tease, and even occasionally irritate one another, while still upholding an underlying foundation of respect and professional regard. Over the years, there were hints that maybe things were not as peaceful behind the scenes as they seemed to be in front of the cameras, despite the fact that their public-facing collaboration seemed solid and their on-air chemistry remained obvious. Particularly in light of Qerim's sudden resignation and the circumstances surrounding it, some on-air situations that were first perceived as light-hearted banter have been retrospectively examined and reinterpreted as possible indications of real strain or discomfort. One particularly significant instance happened in June 2025, a few months prior to Qerim's resignation, when she stopped Smith from discussing what seemed to be private communications or messages on the air. The incident went mostly unnoticed at the time, appearing to be simply another example of Qerim controlling the show's flow and upholding proper boundaries. However, in retrospect, some analysts have hypothesized that her intervention might have signaled growing discomfiture with Smith's propensity to conflate their personal and professional relationships on national television. However, in his podcast, former ESPN commentator Marcellus Way hinted that Smith and Qerim's close and robust working relationship could not have been as strong as it had been in recent months or even years. WY specifically cited Qerim's glaring failure to include Smith in her goodbye Instagram post as especially telling proof of underlying tensions that had reportedly been kept well out of the public eye during their time together.